Welcome to the Relationships Inside Out podcast with Doctors Gregory Seibert and Kimberly Murray, licensed marriage and family therapists. Join them on this journey as they explore the ins and outs of relationships.
All right. Welcome to Relationships Inside Out today. We're going to be talking about criticism.
Ooh, a big one. This comes up if someone's coming to me for couples therapy or really any therapy.
Yeah.
Typically, there's an element of criticism.
Yeah. I feel like everything we talk about is big, but this one's big.
It's so true. So true.
Yeah. Criticism is something like John Gottman, as the researcher has talked about, is one of the top predictors of like divorce or separation, right? It's very erosive in a relationship.
It's one of the four horsemen, correct?
Yeah, four horsemen of the apocalypse, right? Criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And we'll cover those in later times, but today we're going to talk about criticism. And criticism often comes off as verbal, right? We look at it in a verbal way. And it comes typically with you language. You always, you're not good enough. You know, you never do this for me. You never validate me.
Like a putting down.
Yeah. It's really an attack of someone's character and their value, right? That's really kind of where criticism is, and
it might come with some of those nonverbals, but criticism is definitely more of that verbal piece.
Yeah. What would you say, I guess, would be some nonverbals
that might accompany them?
Yeah.
Would be maybe the eye rolling, stomping of feet, slamming things down. If I'm mad, my partner didn't do the dishes, slamming the dishes as I criticize them, like an expression of anger,
very
irritation.
Passive.
Yeah. And I think it's important here too. We should highlight, we're not talking about narcissistic personality disorder. So I can speak for American culture, and for American culture, we'll be like, oh, that person's such a narcissist. And we toss it around as much as we toss around anxiety or the sky is blue.
Yeah.
True narcissism is not what we're talking about here. That is a personality trait that you have a really difficult time, an almost impossible time, seeing the perspective of another. And you become a very centric person, meaning the world just revolves around you.
Yeah.
Those traits might show up with people who are critical, but we're not focusing on narcissistic personality
Not
disorder.
today.
Yeah.
We'll definitely be talking about that at some point.
Yeah.
And that's actually coming to light a little bit more in some of the literature and people specializing in that. So we will definitely get that another day. But yeah, I mean, criticism, I think there isn't a couple that I work with that doesn't exist. And it doesn't even, it doesn't not exist in my own relationship, even being trained in this, right? There's some natural process to it.
Oh, mine's perfect. We don't do that ever.
Yeah. And I think and tell me where you're at on this, but it's often, if I look at someone who's critical, really trying to understand where the criticism is coming from. Like, even if we're critical, right? Why am I being critical right now? And typically there's this underlying kind of protection of something, right? Not being vulnerable. Right.
Maybe it's the best skill I have to communicate my needs aren't being met.
Yeah.
I encourage couples, and we'll talk more about tools in a bit, but I encourage couples to approach with that curiosity. And that's what you're getting at, is digging deep of, okay, I can see someone's being critical. It's a very outward behavior. It's not hard. Sometimes it's not hard to miss. Sometimes it's more subtle, but wondering why, what's the emotion? Where do we learn this skill?
Yeah. And you bring up a good point, because I think when people, but this actually happens, is people personalize it. So when working with couples in conflict, it's usually trying to get rid of that criticism and soften that a little bit. That's really the key, because when someone's so critical, how do you not personalize it? But if we look at it like objectively, typically the person who's being critical, it has to do with them, right? Or if I'm critical, it has to do with me in that moment. And again, protecting something vulnerable. Like, I feel like I'm a failure. Like, I look at it in the context of, say, relationships where one partner just seems to be distancing, quiet, right? And then just say, for example, I'm the other partner, and I perceive that as they don't care about me anymore. So I'm hurt. The underlying emotion is hurt and fear of being rejected or being left. And so I'll start criticizing. And criticizing, when we look at, and we talked in previous episodes, but we'll talk about it again here, is a pursuer technique. So when we look at relationships, there's these interaction cycles, right? One partner will pursue, someone will distance. The more one pursues, the more the other one distances. The more one distances, the more they pursue.
Almost like a push-pull effect.
Yeah, and that's the most common, right? And there's obviously two people pursuing or two people distancing, but criticism is often that pursuer, right?
It's a tough one, because it can show up in those really direct ways of,
Mhm.
why don't you ever do the dishes? Why don't you ever help with the kids? Why do you always let me down? To the more
Mhm.
subtle ways of, I knew you weren't going to do the dishes. Or, wow, I was just talking to my friend and her husband does the dishes every night. It can show up in these really subtle ways. Both are equally corrosive to the relationship, but it's being able to notice when it's happening and doing something with it.
Yeah. And the interesting thing that I find when working with couples is the partner who they have a valid point. I mean, they both partners have valid points, but this one's, they're hurting, right? They feel invalidated. They don't feel heard.
Yeah.
And that's important to get across. But the delivery of how to express that need and that feeling is important. If it comes across critical, who's going to want to meet that need, right? So an example.
No one listens. We think like this is going to make our partner listen. And in fact, it just makes our partner tune them out. Yeah.
I mean, I hear this often. It's, you always interrupt me. You never let me finish.
Yes.
Never.
Always
let me
never.
finish. And it's kind of like, you're right. They don't. But by saying that, it elicits defensiveness on the other partner, right? And what they do with that defensiveness, whether they avoid, right, or they pursue back. This is where we get the distancing or pursuer back. So,
but in either case, you're not listening.
No, because you're trying to defend yourself.
We think things like yelling or being hypercritical is going to make the other person hear us. It's going to get that need met. It's going to soothe that anxiety or anger or whatever we're feeling inside. When in fact, it just perpetuates the cycle and probably ensures it's going to happen again because our partner can't hear us. Think about when someone's critical of you, right? I tell this to people, kind of that empathic framework.
Yeah.
When someone's critical to you, are you able to listen? Do you want to hear their feedback? And people often say, no, I don't. But then we use that as a way to communicate to our partner. So how do we expect a different result if we ourselves couldn't receive that?
Yeah. And this is part of where we have a job in these dynamics. If we want our need met, we got to do our best to be effective in communicating what those needs are without putting the other person on defensive. Right. And
without putting people down.
Yeah. Well, and putting them down will put them on the defensive. Yeah.
True. Yeah.
I mean, criticism, again, you said corrosive. I think when we first started, I said erosive, but corrosive, what I was looking for.
Both work here. Both work.
But it really is over time. If that's all you hear, just imagine from the partner who's continually hearing that, I'm not good enough. I'm failing this relationship. So inevitably you want to kind of withdraw, right? Naturally, if all I'm hearing is I'm doing nothing good. But the important thing, going back to what we said earlier, is that it's not personal. It's for this individual. This is how they've learned to deal with these emotions, right? And there's empathy for them too, because this is probably what they've learned and how they've learned to deal with this.
I often think of adults as just big kids. And when we think of parenting, right, this helps soften some adults. I say, think of your kids. If you said those things to your kids, how do you think they'd feel? They feel pretty shitty about themselves. And in fact, not just shitty, but their confidence starts to go down.
Yeah.
What we know is when confidence goes down, our effectiveness goes down, our drive to take a risk, to do something for someone else, to serve also goes down. So that same concept applies to adults, not just kids. Yeah. So when we're sitting there criticizing our partner, needling them, we are driving their confidence down, their self-worth down, and they're probably less likely to try because they're afraid if I try and I fail, this is what's going to happen to me.
Yeah.
Or if I tell my partner this doesn't feel good, it's just going to get worse. So then we shut down and our partner distance even more. Yeah.
And when we talk about one goal in a relationship is to be intimate, to be connected. We have to be vulnerable. And when we're in a relationship where there's a lot of criticism, it's not safe. And it's not safe to be vulnerable. And if you're not vulnerable, the intimacy's out the window.
Absolutely.
That connection's out the window. This is why it is so damaging long-term in these relationships. Now, all relationships have them. We're talking at a very severe level, right?
Right.
And there's also an idea of constructive criticism.
And let's talk about that, the difference, right? Because I don't think it's good on the other end to say like, never give your partner a critique.
Exactly.
Yeah. How do we make it constructive and effective versus critical?
I mean, the first thing is get rid of the you language.
What does that look like? So for us, we talk about you and I like it's nothing.
Yeah. Let's talk about the you language and dishes, right? You never do the dishes, right? So there's this kind of globalization that you say the you language versus I'm burnt out, I'm tired, and I would really appreciate help with dishes.
Or I feel hurt when.
Yeah. Or I feel hurt when, right? So we're asking for a need. We're not blaming. We don't want to, you language is kind of that blaming, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can get constructive criticism about that in a roundabout way by talking about how this situation is making you feel, right? Instead of saying, you make me feel.
Again, I'm going to say this all the time. No one can make another person feel a certain way.
Yeah.
No one has that much power. We give that power, right? Or we stop regulating ourselves. And so thinking back to that, you versus I, if you say you make me angry, they can't actually make you angry. Yeah. That's your response and your reaction to mitigate within yourself. But you can say, I feel angry when, or I feel hurt when. I feel hurt when you don't follow through on something you said you do. I feel hurt when I don't feel supported in parenting or house chores or whatever. The thing is, the message is still the same.
Yeah.
Right. I'm still expressing hurt or frustration, or that something isn't going the way I'd hoped it would, right? A need's not being met. But now my partner can hear it. If I start with you, it's like it puts earplugs in.
Yeah.
We're done. We're not listening. We've checked out. Now we're in defensive mode. Because when we hear you, it's okay. What do I got to defend? What did I do today?
Yeah. Walking on those eggshells. Yeah. That's a good point. Especially when there's highly critical partner, right?
So how do we make it constructive?
So on the therapeutic sense, what I like to do with couples is the first thing I try to do is soften the person who's critical, right? And there's different approaches, and depending on where it goes, because sometimes when we're being critical, if we've done it so much, we don't even know we're being critical. And again, sometimes it is just the perception of the partner and how they perceive it, but that's what matters. If they perceive it as critical, then I need to kind of maybe adapt what I'm doing. And so
such a good point there.
Yeah. And
it's not just the way we interpret it as we're delivering our feedback. It's how is this going to land for my partner, and knowing how it's, or trying to anticipate a little bit of how it's going to land for our partner.
Yeah. Like for my wife, my tone of voice. Right. I was in the military 9 years. There's a lot of sternness sometimes. And I don't even pick up on it until she says something, right? So working with couples, we soften that, work with them. Where is that coming from? Identify the emotions. But sometimes I'll even give an example of criticism to them and ask them, and then give them another example where I'm not using criticism. I use kind of what you just said earlier, like when this happens, I felt this, or, I'm burnt out on the dishes and I'm not really feeling supported in this moment, in other areas. And I think when we're softening this, we also have to validate.
Yes.
So yes, we're going to give this critique, constructive criticism of, I just don't feel supported in this context. These other areas, you're doing an amazing job. Like, I care about you. This is not a question of your character. I just need more support here. Right. And that validation is key to also soften it.
And that always never language.
Oh,
we've all done it, except for me again, because my relationship's perfect. Right, Chris?
I still do it, unfortunately, sometimes. So,
I do. But getting away from that, because rarely, if it's ever, is it an actual like always or never situation. Yeah,
it's not that global or black and white.
No. And so being able to say like, hey, I've noticed that this pattern's happening. I've noticed you've been more disconnected with the kids. I noticed, or I'm feeling like I've been taking on a lot more of the house chores. Do you mind picking up one or two? Whatever it might be, but being able to soften it so that we're not going straight for the gut. We're not doing this always, never, and putting down can be really impactful.
Yeah. And it is really important for that partner who tends to criticize more to be softened in order for the other partner to feel safe enough to then express their needs. Right. Because then we get this imbalance too, where the person who's critical, and then the other partner just withdraws kind of emotionally, right? This is where the intimacy kind of disappears. So softening that helps bring that up so then we can approach the real issues.
Would you encourage both partners to soften?
Yeah. I mean, it's not a matter of like the person who's critical is the problem in this relationship. This is a defense technique that needs to kind of, calm down a little bit so we can actually get to some of the underlying dynamics that are not really effective for them to process stress together or whatever they're going through. Right. And
as we build back up that almost like emotional safety, right, to be vulnerable, it allows for in real time, if my partner's having a rough day and he comes at me critically, right, or he says something kind of harsh, like you were talking about tone, it gives me the chance to say, hey, I want to hear what you're saying. And I'm having a hard time hearing it because you're yelling, because it sounds like you're really angry. Do you mind rephrasing? Do you mind taking a breath?
Mm-hmm.
Can we take a pause and come back to this? Whatever it might be, it allows for the person who's receiving
Mm-hmm.
to say, I want to hear your feedback, but I can't because of X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. And they have to feel safe enough to do that too.
That's what I mean. So
yeah.
as an emotional safety builds back up.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which can be hard at the beginning. So it relies on the person who is more of the critical stance in that to do some introspection, to shift some of how they're delivering to their partner what their feedback is.
Yeah. And it again, it's not just the partner who's critical that is at fault here, right? Because also working with the person who might be distancing and talking about how to re-engage, right? Because the more they distance, the more that they're going to get that pursual, especially if that distancing is, again, perceived as not good enough. You're leaving me,
Yeah. And I talked to couples too. Sometimes we get hyper focused on, okay, there's this pattern. We have to solve the pattern. Sometimes the solution to the pattern has nothing to do with the pattern itself. For example, if we're not having a lot of play together, if we're not laughing a lot, we might get more critical because we're focused only on the negatives.
Mm-hmm.
So aside from how can we give feedback to one another, also incorporating how can we play more together? Yeah. Have we been dating? What does our sex look like? What does our stress levels look like? How do we adjust those? Self-care, but looking at it from a multifaceted approach as a way of also softening both partners.
Yeah. Yeah.
Having these dialogues.
I love that. Yeah. It's a good point because maybe the criticism is a response to stress of maybe not being able to connect as much, which is counterintuitive because we're not going to want to connect now that I'm being criticized.
So I think so many of our strategies that we learn in childhood, learn as adults, are counterintuitive to the actual goal we want. So I find it comical that we even lean in on these, right? Of yelling. I think this is going to help them hear me, when research says it doesn't help anyone hear anyone. Right. But yet that tends to be where we lean. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I think too, we think about it, and I think everyone talks about this quite a bit, is the critical partner is more critical on themselves than they are when it's coming out. So I think about that when someone's critical. I'm like, man, what do they tell themselves when they mess up?
What has someone else told them before this moment about themselves?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's key. And I like what you said earlier about the global perspective. And that's one way to help soften it too, is think about, I guess, in the context of our partners, what do you appreciate about them in the span of your relationship? What are things you like, right? To help kind of calm some of maybe those emotions that are driving this criticism of not feeling wanted, of, well, when are times that I have been appreciated? Oh, this time, that time. And
and if we can think, so if you're the partner that you perhaps perceive as less critical, right? We're often more critical than we like to give ourselves credit for.
Perceive.
If we perceive ourselves as more of the distancer, the less critical. One thing we can do, and it was just building off what we were just talking about, is that empathy of getting curious with your partner.
Yeah.
How did they come to this style of communication? What's going on for them that they feel this is how they have to communicate for me? What's going on for our relationship? What can I do to help them feel supported? Can I hear what they're saying? Sometimes take it with a grain of salt, right? We all have shitty days where we're snappy, and so take it with a grain.
You, of course,
except for me. My kids and husband would agree. No, they wouldn't. But having that empathy, or that curiosity of, and I'm hearing that you're upset right now. Can you tell me what's going on for you?
Yeah.
Or thinking about their family of origin. If you've met their parents or family, maybe that was something they learned in their home. Yeah. Maybe they learned from their parents who were critical of them that that's how we talk to people, or that's their internal voice of, I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
And therefore I project it onto other people. Right.
Yeah. And it brings up this idea too, when we talked about, again, it's not just the person who's critical, because I think about criticism also as a product of them not maybe feeling safe in the relationship. And this is why you got to get both partners involved, right, as well in the process. So first I soften the criticism and kind of understand where it's coming from, but then thinking about how the other partner, just like you talked about, how can they engage to make it also feel safe for that person where they don't have to be critical? Because again, if that criticism is a response to not feeling good enough, so I have to bring this person down.
Or to feel like they're losing them. So they're trying so hard to hook them back in.
Yeah. I got to belittle them, right? And make them feel less than, because I'm feeling less than.
And in either role, a need isn't being met.
Yeah.
Right. The person who's critical, their need is just maybe being expressed louder or more directly. But it's still on the role of the distancer to share what their needs are. Why are they distancing? How do we step into a role where we can say, hey, I'm pulling back from you because, or I'm feeling stressed. And when I'm stressed, I retreat. It has no reflection of you, right? Even going back to those family patterns.
What's so interesting about that, I love that you brought that up, because now we're talking about them, couples communicating from unacknowledged emotions.
Yes.
And not being able to get to that. And I can't tell you, I don't know a time where couples weren't surprised when they realized that both of them felt not wanted or unloved, in that the dynamics from criticism to distancing was just a mere product of feeling that. And that's how they managed it. But both of them felt that way. And when they were to communicate from that, it was just so profound and deep. And I mean, they connected on that of like, oh my God, I'm not alone in this.
I think of that iceberg. It's an image that circulates in psychology all the time. 20% of the iceberg's above the water. And that's those feelings we come to recognize. So anger, sadness, happiness, when really 80% is down below. And that's that deeper, more vulnerable parts. When we look at vulnerability cycles, those vulnerable parts of, I feel alone. I feel abandoned. I feel unworthy. I feel unloved. I am scared, like deeply scared. And when we can get partners down to that kind of deeper space, all of a sudden it's, holy shit, I didn't know you felt that way.
Yeah.
And there's this mass softening that can happen across the system.
Yeah.
It takes work, right? This typically takes some intensive work and dedication, often in couples therapy.
Yeah.
And some uncomfortable feelings and hard conversations, but that can be really powerful. We may not even know what our deeper emotions are. We may be only able to access those more cerebral types of emotions until we learn some skills to dig deeper.
Yeah.
And explore, where does our own criticism come from? Oh, my mom was critical. I didn't even think about that. I hear that from couples all the time. Oh, I didn't even think about how my family played a part. Oh, I didn't think about how that one relationship showed me this. I didn't. Or I had a client I was working with, and they're like, I'm not critical of myself. I'm not insecure. Within like 3 sessions, it was, wow, I really am critical of myself. I'm a perfectionistic kind of person.
Yeah.
And that comes from being insecure.
You bring that up, and it reminds me, there's some couples I tell them, when we realize where that critical narrative comes from, they'll be critical in processing and therapy. And I'm like, so your mom is now just entering the room. And they're like, oh my God. And it really trips them out. But
think it's about so true. As I picture my mom literally entering the room.
They're like, those are my mom's words, right? And
yes.
I'm like, yeah, they're still there. And it does provide, just being aware of it provides some incentive of like, I need to stop that, because I don't want my mom still talking to me in that way, right? Or whatever it might be.
And that's where those generational cycles continue. Because if I don't know, if I don't notice that, like I can notice what happened with my mom, for example, didn't feel good for my body, right? The way she acted sometimes or talked sometimes. If I don't then interpret, okay, now I'm also doing the same thing to my kids, it continues for generations. So it's not just recognizing that didn't feel good for me, but holy shit, I'm perpetuating that cycle.
Yeah.
Whether it looks the same or different, because it can look different, being able to catch it within ourselves, which takes some introspection, some kind of digging deep and getting a little raw with yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Like for me and my wife, I'm the critical partner. Like I identify as that person who's critical, right? And I grew up, military was critical. You and I were in academia, super critical. And kind of that narrative gets exacerbated in these contexts, but being aware of it and recognizing it. And I think you said something earlier I really liked, or you did say something earlier that I really liked. And it was the idea that, how do I be curious and approach them and say, what's going on for you? Because when my wife does that, it stops me on track. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. I'm frustrated. And I'm able to identify emotions, which helps, right? Rather than getting out of that content that I'm being critical about, I think about what is really going on for me.
Think about that. Like for those who are listening, put your mind, your body back in a space when you're really angry. Say you were yelling or throwing something or shutting down. What if someone had come to you and said, I see you're angry. What do you need right now? Imagine what a mind fuck that would be for you. Like I think about that of instead of being like, why are you so angry right now? That doesn't help anything.
Yeah.
Hate to break it to everyone listening. That sentence, or my ultimate favorite, just calm down. Just calm down.
Yeah. You need therapy. I've heard that one.
Oh
my goodness.
I can't. People, these phrases don't work. I told my husband, he knew this of the phrase calm down infuriates me. I was in labor with my first and was on hour 16 of labor.
Oh God.
So terrible. And the nurse came in. She's like, you need to calm down. I just need you to calm down. I thought I was going to lay her out. And Chris was like, don't say that to her. And she was like, well, I just need you to calm down. And I turned around and used some colorful language at the nurse, and my nurse was switched. But knowing that these phrases we think are, I don't know why we think they're helpful.
Yeah.
They're not. Right. I totally digressed on that tangent, but it's to show like when people are agitated using these phrases, why are you so angry? Why are you being critical? That is a critical statement of itself. If we can swap it for, wow, I'm noticing you're angry right now.
Yeah.
You look like you're hurting right now. How can I support you? Do you want a hug?
And that is very tough to do when you're being criticized.
Oh, absolutely.
If you're personally attacked, right? And that's why I look at those responses of like, you need to calm down right now. Typically it's like a response in the midst of like your fight or flight of like, oh my God, threat,
anxiety,
danger.
Yeah.
Like I'm being criticized, I'm being attacked, right? And it makes sense. But if we can first depersonalize it and realize this has nothing to do with us, even though language is, right? Something's going on for them emotionally, then I can then attend with more compassion. But I have to depersonalize it first. As much as they're using personal language and know where to dig, right? And I like in the beginning we were talking about it can be nonverbal, and I get couples who have had criticism for many years, right? And the partner who's been receiving that criticism has kind of like nonverbals that they engage in because they already know the criticism that's coming when they make a mistake, right? Like, oh God, I didn't take out the trash. I know it's coming.
Or it's going through the Rolodex of what did I do today? What did I do today?
Yeah. And so they know, and the person who's critical like can see that response of like, oh my God, like they're judging me or whatever, right? It just exacerbates these things.
And I think about for what you were just saying of, okay, for me to be able to slow down and say, hey, I'm noticing you're angry, that takes a lot of self-control.
Oh, God.
So a part of our conversation isn't just what does criticism look like, it's what to do with it.
Yeah.
Part of it is our own work, even if we're the distancer, of self-soothing. Well, this is for both partners. Self-soothing. What are things that can help me soothe in real time? Is it calling a pause or a timeout? Is it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1? So engaging your 5 senses. Is it taking deep breaths? What is it for you? Ice.
And do you mind going over the 5 senses again? Just a reminder for
Yeah. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's 5 things I see, 4 things I
can physically feel around you.
3 things I hear, 2 things I smell, and then 1 deep breath.
Yeah.
Unless you're eating a piece of chocolate or something. Then you can do taste. But it's slowing it down. It's taking our mind out of anxious, future-oriented kind of brain or depressed, past-oriented brain into just the present moment, worrying about my heart rate. How do I bring it down? And we're going to do a future podcast on this of how to regulate and slow ourselves down. Also what anxiety even looks like. Anyway, but a big piece of breaking this pattern as a partnership is both partners learning, what do I need to do to self-soothe?
Yeah.
It's not up to my partner to soothe my body. It's up to me.
Yeah.
My partner can call a timeout if I'm not able to recognize I need to soothe. Or we've talked about, Chris and I use yellow. Like we can have a code word of, hey, we're crossing some territory here.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, both partners have to have those skills engaged.
Yeah. Have
to have access to them. So starting to build those skills, knowing what works for my body may not work for my partner's body. And that's okay too.
Yeah. And kind of going along the lines of like what to do. One is, I mean, I think that awareness of knowing why I'm being critical, what is going on for me emotionally, like to be able to identify that and put ourselves in a position to understand, how is this criticism even helping? Because I think, again, going back, we might actually have a legitimate criticism. It's not about that. It's about how do you deliver that to your partner so it can be received. is really the big one. And I think awareness is just one big step just to get there, because if you can identify the emotions that are driving that, that's what you can talk about. And that helps break that cycle, right?
Even that piece, I'll hear people say like, I don't even know what I'm feeling. Okay, if you feel like you're in the weeds, go to therapy.
Yeah.
Reach for support. Unfortunately, in our school system, we teach crap, like, no offense to the engineers and architects and all the sciencey and mathy people, but calculus and things that the average like chunk of the population probably doesn't need on day to day.
Dissecting frogs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we don't teach how to be a good human, how to regulate our emotions, how to be a good parent.
Yeah.
Like these basic 101 things
Good partner.
we all need,
Yeah.
but we don't talk about it. We just expect people to know. We talked about that with sex.
Yeah.
We don't talk about it, but we expect you to know how to do it. The same is true here. We expect people to know how to identify their emotions, how to regulate their emotions, and how to communicate about them.
I mean, let's be real. Like, even though we're trained in this, I didn't know how to identify emotions growing up. And I'm still working on that, because that's not what we're socialized to do.
That's how I found this field, was because I was so dysregulated. I talked about it in our first episode. I shoved my partner.
Yeah.
Because that's what I grew up seeing.
Yeah.
And that's the only way I knew how to regulate. And he had that moment of like, I've never had that happen to me. You're going to fix this or we can't continue. And I had to go to therapy. So even though I have some of the skills now, I'm still learning new skills all the time.
Absolutely.
And it took a lot of work to get there.
Yeah.
So if this feels like, shit, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to identify my emotions or how to self-regulate or cope. Reach out, email us. We can give you some tools. We can help give you a referral if you need, or look at therapists that are local to you.
Yeah.
Get that support. It's the hardest session is that first one.
It is. Yeah. And be okay shopping around. Like,
yes,
you might take an average of 3 therapists that you shop around to kind of find one that's a good fit. And then
fit is crucial here. I want to emphasize that.
Yeah.
Just because you don't fit with one therapist doesn't mean therapy is the problem. It's that you and the therapist don't click, much like friendships.
Yeah.
Not that it's a friendship, but you should click.
Yeah. It's style, right?
Yeah.
Someone might be more into the mindfulness stuff and the client might not be. That's just not where they're at. And that's okay. That's a style mismatch. Go find one that fits with that need is for you. Right.
But don't be afraid. Like if you're thinking to yourself, yeah, my partner is really critical, or I'm critical, or we are disconnected, or whatever it might be, reach for that support. Find a workshop, find a couples workshop, a couples retreat, a couples train, anything.
Yeah.
These aren't skills that we're taught, but yet they are so important.
And you're not alone. You're not a bad person if this is the cycle. This is one of the most common kind of dynamics that exist in a relationship. Hence why John Gottman put it as the top 4 reasons of predictors.
It's in friendships, families,
it's
partnerships, parenting. And your therapist, if you do have one, they struggle with it.
Yeah.
Your pastor probably struggles with it.
Yeah.
People that you hold in high esteem, even the highest paid people in our country or the most prestigious people struggle with it.
Absolutely.
No one is immune.
No one. But the important thing is recognizing that, learning how to soften it, or if you're the other partner, is learning how to approach that in a softer way that doesn't exacerbate that criticism, right? Identifying your needs and what you want and what is really the purpose of the criticism, to be able to communicate that, self-soothe.
Curiosity, empathy.
For the partner, for the other.
And self-curiosity, self-empathy, self-compassion. And we're going to have many episodes on those, but it's not just about having empathy for our partner, but empathy for, shit, I was really hard on my partner. And instead of going to, I'm such a bad person, why did I do that? Maybe going at it from, where did that come from?
I'm human.
How can I do different? Giving myself some compassion, going to my partner and apologizing if it feels safe to do so. Yeah.
And recognizing you're human.
Absolutely.
Us being trained in this. Well, not Kim, she's perfect, but
can't help it.
We engage in this. Like I identified earlier, I'm tend to be the critical partner.
Me too.
And I'm very critical myself. Right. So it tends to kind of go hand in hand.
And it's interesting because that dynamic is one of the most common, right? You and I tend to be the more critical partners and we're married to much less critical people.
Yeah.
But it can also draw in different dynamics. Like I would say my husband is less critical in our home. He might be more grumpy at times. Sorry, honey. Might be a little more grumpy at times, but at work, he wears that critical hat.
Yeah.
Much more than he does at home. And so it can also look different by the role you're in, the relationship you're in.
In a previous episode, we talked about that role can flip, right? That pursuer distancer.
Absolutely.
And if somebody who tends to be critical right now in this relationship, if you're in a relationship where somebody who's more critical, you'll tend to distance, right? So,
and even in friendships, I'm much less critical.
Yeah.
than with my poor hubby. But that's because I feel safest with him. I feel most raw and open. And knowing that means I have to be careful.
Yeah.
Because I know he's my safe place. So sometimes he gets to see the least loveliest sides of me. And so being mindful of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Are there any other tips that you can think of that before we kind of
approaching this as a team rather than fix my partner?
Wait, that's the number one complaint. That's the number one complaint that comes in is my partner's
my partner. Come in as a team.
Yeah.
Try, even if it's just a little bit of compassion, a little bit of empathy, right? Try to build it in here.
Yeah.
And think about your kids. Think about the people around you. Think about for yourself. Yeah. You deserve different and you deserve better.
Yeah. I love that.
You. Any other tips?
I think we covered a lot, and there's gonna be some overlapping stuff when we talk in family of origin, kind of where this comes from. I had one. I lost it, but that's okay. We're imperfect. I can't be critical of myself.
I have one more.
Yeah.
2, if someone is hypercritical and they're not seeking change, also having a real talk with yourself of, is this a healthy and safe space for me? Which we've talked about with communications and the other ones. That may be the end result too. Not always can there be resolution found in this. So giving yourself grace if you're with a hypercritical partner to also know what are your boundaries, and if those boundaries can't be respected, thinking of what are the healthy consequences for that.
Yeah, that's a good one. I did remember what the other one I was thinking of is, because criticism and that pursuer distancer is considered negative interaction.
Yeah.
We want to balance out with positive interactions.
Absolutely.
We're going to be imperfect. We're going to have these negative interactions. Just do a good job of prioritizing your relationship or friendship and making sure that those dynamics that are positive outweigh the negative, right? And I think John Gottman gives their ratio for positive negative interactions in relationships. So like during conflict, you want 5 positives, every 1 negative. And then in lay time, when it's just kind of not in conflict, it's 20 to 1. I mean, that's a lot. I don't even know if I can even get.
I don't think I can get close.
But the concept is putting more, substance in that bucket of positive interactions that we can draw from that. Going back to what we talked about earlier, that global perspective of my partner's not always bad. Like they didn't do the dishes. It doesn't mean they're a horrible human being. They haven't been supporting me in this moment, right? They're good. Like look at all these moments that we've had.
Yes.
And it helps add to that perspective and build that positive sentiment so we can give our partners benefit of the doubt.
It just softens, right? If I can think about, okay, he kind of sucked at doing the dishes, but yesterday he gave me a break with the kids. He took out the trash, whatever it might be, swept the snow off my car. Love it.
Yeah.
Well, this has been Relationships Inside Out podcast, where we dive into what relationships look like and hopefully what healthy relationships can look like for you. If anyone has any questions, feedback, ideas for next topics, go ahead and email us at relationshipsinsideout@gmail.com and let us know, and we'll be happy to assist. But we thank everyone for listening, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Yep. See you soon.